Going to be really interesting because we're going to spend the next hour building one method. Um, so let me open this up by saying that probably shouldn't have started recording, but it's okay. But yeah, this is your last lecture for Mod 1. And this essentially kind of encompasses and should bring full circle a lot of what you did. What this lecture is known as like Intro to TDD. I know there's a lot of GIFs up here that are probably really distracting, but that's okay. Come at me, bro. Look at this. Whoa! Whoa! Let's just finish this one. Wow. Wow. All right, sorry. So the idea is that what I want to introduce you to is the concept of testing. So there's different types of testing. So the first one we're going to go over today is going to be called TDD, so test-driven development. And what that is you're going to write these tests, and they will literally drive your development, which is kind of fun and interesting. And you'll see what that means here in a second. The next one, as you get into Mod 2, we start talking about like the internet and the browser, and I start clicking through. How do I write code to create this web browser where if somebody clicks on reactions or clicks on upload or clicks on this search bar, something should happen? That is a behavior. And so we're testing the behavior. So there's like behavior-driven development, BDD. And then a lot of you, like me, will do my favorite kind, the unofficial kind of test-driven development, is EDD. There's error-driven development. You just write a lot of code. It doesn't work. You're like, okay. Did you mean? And I'm like, I sure did. And then you go ahead and write it, and it works like a champ. Bless up to Active Record. So the reason I want to start this like Power Rangers GIF and this sort of series and this theme, I don't know if yesterday you noticed that I summoned the Megazord. Okay, it's not happening. Who here is, just so I know, so I'm not completely losing it, who here has seen, watched, or heard of the Power Rangers? Okay. My God. One time I had a class where they were very young, and they did not know the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And so this lecture fell on its face, and it did not go well. But I'm glad all of you do, so that's good. So the reason I want to talk about the Power Rangers is because the analogy is that all of them have to work together, right? And so that's like literally every single episode. It's kind of like Scooby-Doo, where we kind of know what's going to happen, right? Like, oh my God, look. Oh! He gets his butt kicked for a little bit, and then for whatever reason, every episode, they're like, I have to summon this giant robot and fight like the boss. I have to fight this bad person, and then they should be good to go. But they can't actually form, right, as a team if one of them is missing. Each person, unless you're Tommy the Green Ranger, each person is like a different part of like this robot, right? One person's the head, one person's the left arm, one person's the right arm. I don't know who wants to be the leg, but one person's got to be the leg, and then the other leg, and it's like kind of like a mess. But the idea is that this Megazord, this super robot, can't really be formed if one of them goes down. All right, so far, are you with me on this? Right? It'd be crazy, like, oh my God, let's go fight the boss, and then like, for whatever reason, like the blue and yellow ranger wanted to take a day off. They're like, no, I'm just gonna mail it in today. Called in sick, and then it's just a head, body, and two legs. Like that's not gonna work. And so what we have is like very, very good code that sort of mirrors what's going on over here, right? I'm gonna shorten this, but imagine each one of these was sort of like part of the ranger class. I would instantiate like a new object, and they'd be all in like their own file, whatever, right? But here, just to keep it all in one file so it's easy to visualize, I've just got these methods, right? So you got a visual representation of the blue ranger, the black ranger, the pink ranger, the yellow ranger, and then the red ranger. Cool? And so now I want to like form the Megazord. So I actually just want to combine all of them in some powerful method. And so all I'm going to do is put inside my awesome code a method that's just called Megazord. Yeah, I think that's how to spell it. If it's wrong, I'm sorry. Please forgive me. And so all this is going to do is essentially combine all of them, right? So I'm going to do a little blue, and I'm going to do a little plus black, plus pink, plus that yellow, and a little red. And that's all I'm going to do. And this is, in theory, sort of combining all of them. And so how can I actually run this method? What do I need to do now? Yeah, I need to call the method. So let me do that. Ooh, Megazord. So what actually is going to come out though? What will come out on the screen when I run this code?
Not going to put anything, but it's going to return it.
Does this actually print to the screen at all? What does this really return? So nothing. So let me just print it. Boop. P for print, or you can print the string. So let's actually run this code. Cool? Boop. Sorry, I was doing a CSS lecture. You guys are 08, 05. You guys are 11. Cool. So if I run Ruby, right, and this is called Power Rangers. Wow, what a great name. So I run this. What's going to happen is I'm going to see sort of like all of them combined, right? This is not like sexy. It's just the analogy I need you to follow me with. And so that combines all of them. And now you're in development, right? You're at work, and your boss is like, great, we need to make new features or update features. So the first thing is like, oh my God, you guys seen the show, right? There's more than just these folks here. And they add on one more Ranger, right? So your boss comes in like, hey, we have to build this Power Rangers app. And guess who joins us? None other than our boy Tommy, who is actually the Green Ranger. Cool? No? Yes? Is this too old? Remember Tommy? The lady killer? Oh my God. Tommy's a bad guy at first. Do you remember this? Okay. All right, I watched way too much. What? No. Yeah, Tommy. Come on. We all know Tommy. All right, great. So I'm just gonna add this Green Ranger, right? And for whatever reason, it's Tommy. It's Tommy. So your boss is like, great. You got to combine them. You got to add them into the Megazord. For whatever reason, you have to integrate him. You're like, cool. So this is the code that you decide to write. And in order to integrate him to the Megazord, you're like, cool, NBD, I'm just going to add the Green Ranger. Awesome. So you're responsible for that feature. And so now you need to test it. So great. I'm just going to run the code and see what happens. Smooth sailing. I've added Tommy, the Green Ranger, to my application. Now, you decide to go on vacation, right? You're like, you know what? Oh my God, I've had a long, hard day of summoning the Megazord, and I'm tired, right? Rita is just, we saved the world. She's gone. None of these references are landing. I just watched an episode last night to stay relevant, but I realized it was probably 10 years since you've seen this. So Rita's a bad person. Yeah. And then she would like come out of the ground and start laughing for no reason. Do you guys remember this? Either way, the idea is that somebody else now will pull this code, and now your boss, obviously, as like a hard worker as he or she is, tells you, hey, turns out the TV show actually changes the Green Ranger to white. Now it's the White Ranger, right? Tommy has went from a bad guy to a good guy, joins the Power Rangers as the White Ranger. And so imagine all of this code, right? They're all in their own separate files. And then the summon the Megazord is in its own run.rb file. I don't know every single place that you wrote where the Green Ranger is. I don't really know all of it. And it would take me too long to dig through the hundreds of files to check, hey, where did you call the Green Ranger? And so for me, I'm thinking, great, you've asked me to change the Green Ranger to white. So I'm going to update that feature. And I'm going to go inside the Green Ranger. And I'm going to be like, great, you're no longer green, but you are now the White Ranger. I'm going to submit a PR. I'm going to push this code. I'm going to look at my boss and be like, job's done. The Green Ranger is now white. And he's like, fantastic. Why don't you go ahead and merge that bad boy to master, and let's ship that code to production. What do you think actually happens when you run that code? Ruh-roh. It says that Megazord, right, has some sort of undefined method, green, and it breaks. Wouldn't it have been nice had I wrote some sort of test before I shipped to production to make sure that all of these cases, everything works before I push to production, before I merge to master? And so that's why tests are important. And really, that's really kind of like the whole Power Rangers analogy. And that is, if features change, things get updated, and then I push to production, right? If I don't test, there are little things that can break. Who here right now is working on an app where you're like, oh, you know what would be really cool? If I added this feature, and you're like, great, that feature works, but it breaks something else in your app. That has happened? Yeah. That's known as brittle code. And so that probably means that your code is really tightly coupled. So one method is doing more than one thing. So if everything does one thing, it's very easy to identify, like, it's easy to identify here what went wrong. And so let's write some tests, right, and kind of figure out how we can account for any one of these sort of like random possibilities so we can make sure that everything works before we push to production. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to actually build our own RSpec so we can demystify that learn. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to take RSpec, all right, which is a gem that I have installed, which is gem install RSpec. And then I'm just going to do, I think it's like dash dash init. So I'm going to initialize RSpec into my application. So when I run this command, it creates a .rspec file, and it creates a spec folder specifically with something called spec helper. So let's take a look at what that is. Bloop. Okay. It does something like dash dash require the spec helper, and then inside spec helper, I see like all of this code, which is insane. You can't really see it. I'm sorry about this like backlighting, but what this is saying is essentially this file was generated with RSpec init. Wow. Conventionally, all the specs, right, live under a spec directory, which I could see here. The spec directory is built for me. Bless up to RSpec. And then RSpec adds this sort of like load path, right? And so something with the .rspec file does something called dash dash require spec helper, which will cause this file to always be loaded. What that really means is if I put anything inside this spec file, I need to create a new file, all right, and call it spec, like program. Or is it program spec? I think it's program spec. Program followed by this underscore spec. If I add this underscore spec, it automatically sort of like loads in all of RSpec for me into this file. And so it's doing a little bit of magic for me. And so here what I want to do now is I want to build out this application, and let's actually figure out like how this test-driven development kind of help us. So inside program, all I want to do this entire lecture is build this one method. Some of you are thinking, oh man, I could do that in 2 seconds. Yeah? No? Yes? No? How would you check to see whether or not something is a palindrome? What really is a palindrome? Say again? Right, so a palindrome is the word or phrase is the same backwards and forwards. Cool? That's really about it. So if this method takes in a word, how can I check to see whether or not it's a palindrome? Well, let's just assume word's a string for right now, right? But yeah, I would simply do word, right? And I would just double check to see, is it the same as word.reverse? Cool? All right, that's it, we're done. Good job. Good job, everybody. Good job, nailed it. Some of you are not satisfied. Was it anticlimactic, the last lecture? Was it not everything you thought it'd be? Well, let's think through, right? I need to test this now. It'd be crazy, sort of that workflow. How many of you right now are writing a method, updating a method, fixing an error or bug, and then you have to go right back into your application, run bin/run.rb, and then go through the command prompts, pick the 1, pick the 7, run the update, and then hit the error again. You're like, okay, that didn't fix it. Then you go back into your code, you're like, what went wrong? Fix it. Oh, it was a typo. Go right back to your terminal, run that bin run, go hit 7, hit update, type in the new string, and then you're like, oh, good, it works now. Right? That's a terrible workflow. It needs to be faster. So if we write these tests, we can make it so that it's just like learn. When we run learn or we run RSpec, it runs all these tests, And if it passes everything, I know it's functioning as I intended instead of having to manually test my application. And so this saves you a lot of time. So let's actually write this test, right? Inside program spec, I need the context for this file. And so if I'm going to test the program, RB, I need to actually pull that file in. So the first thing I'm going to do is pull that file in by require or require, yeah. And then based on where that path is relative to here, how can I get to program? Is it just inside that same folder, program.rb? You gotta speak up for me.
//
Nice. All right, yeah, so I need to go up from here, one folder to the app, the parent, and then inside there, there's this program. So I've got this here, right? Has anyone taken a sneak peek into the RSpec file? What is in that file? How do you actually write tests? All right, it starts with what? It starts with describe. Have you seen this before? Cool, so describe. And then what? Huh? Yeah, describe is literally like, what are you trying to describe? And that is, there's this method that I have called isPalindrome, right? Boop. And then what about it? Well, it should do something, first of all, right? So when I do, I end. You guys get this phone call, scam likely? It's crazy. Sorry about that. All right, so what should it do? Ooh, wow. It's crazy. And it should what? Right. I'm assuming, right, because I have this question mark, that this should always return what type of data? Like a Boolean, right? True, false, also acceptable, right? And it should return true if it is actually, right, a palindrome. Cool? And so what does that really mean, right? I'm describing it, and this is what it should do. And so what I'm actually expecting is that when I run is palindrome, it should be true. So expect, oh my God, wow, Ruby this is crazy how this reads. And expects what method? Bloop. Cool. Actually, it takes in an argument. Expects is palindrome, right? And I have to pass in a word here as an example. So what's a popular palindrome that everyone likes to kind of like make sure it's good to go? That's right, race car, right? And everyone thinks that race car is a good one. And this should equal, what is it? I think it's like EQ? 2 equal, right? That one, there we go. I think that's right. 2 equal?
Is there another dot? Don't do a dot.
2 dot? Nah, I think it should look like this. I've written some notes for me. I'm going to look it up here in a second. But what should this equal, right? If I pass in poop, what should the return value be of this palindrome? It should be true. Cool. Let's see if I've even written this correctly. And that is, we'll actually have to run these tests. So luckily for us, we have RSpec all wired up. So I simply type in RSpec. And there it goes. Okay, yeah, it didn't like that. I think it's 2 underscore. Or not. No, I wrote this down. The syntax is like a little, yeah, it's 2 equal. This should be okay.
Oh yeah, you gotta wrap parentheses around it.
I have to move what now? I have to close the expect. Oh, you're right. Oh, my Lord. Before the dot two? Oh, I closed it outside? Wow. Bless up, team. Great. Wow, we're done, right? So let me tell you a couple quick pointers about RSpec and writing tests. So the first thing you want to do is you want to definitely pass in examples where it works, right? You want your method to actually work. So you're testing, if I pass in something that I know for sure should be working, it works. Naturally, what else should I be testing? When it doesn't work, right? So pass in examples where it don't work. No bueno. Sad face. Ooh, actually, oh, look at that. Nose. Clown. So how can we do that? What else should it do? Right. It should return false if it is nay, not, whatever, palindrome. Cool. And so now I have to change this to false. And so now I should test it. Right? Will poop actually run false though? What's like not a palindrome? Ranger? Fart?
Race cars.
Okay, I'm gonna go keep it classy. Race cars should not return true. I'm gonna pause the recording for like half a second. Anyways, yeah, back to testing. If we run RSpec, let's see what happens. Those green lights, that feels good. Feels good, man. So, all right, well, I guess that's really about it, right? We done? Well, you know no, but do they? So let's think about some other things that RSpec should test for, right? You want to make sure at least minimum, right, that it definitely works and it definitely doesn't work when it shouldn't, right? That makes sense. And so now we have to kind of test these like weird cases, right? And these are the decisions that we should be making as developers, or if we don't want to make them, we ask our boss to make them, the senior developer. And here's what I mean. So sometimes you're going to run into situations where it's like, is it though? And it's kind of dicey. For example, if I pass in the string 111, palindrome, not a palindrome. The question is like, what really is a palindrome in your application? Because by definition, I would say, yeah, could it go? But in our app, do we want numbers to be considered palindromes? Do we though? And guess what? In another powerful 90s reference, you've seen Captain Planet? The power is yours. Okay, no one like that, all right? But yeah, the idea is that like you decide as the developer, or you can push it up to your senior developer or the architect. Like, hey, I'm running into what is known as a edge case. The edge cases are 90% of the time it's going to work perfectly as intended. But sometimes, 10% of the time, you're going to run into like weird solutions where you might not think of every day, and it's kind of like, is it though? And so what would you like to do? Would you want numbers to be sort of palindromes in your mind, in your application? Who says yes? Okay, who says no? Okay, sorry, man. I'm sorry. They said no. So, right, should return false if it is a number. Is this really a number? We'll get to that. So let's take a look. I'm going to come in here, I'm going to run these tests, and I'm going to see Rutrow. Man, I'm feeling 90s today. Anyone recognize that reference? Jinkies. Thank you. All right, so it's nothing to do with the lecture. Expected false but got true. Why would I expect false? How can I start reading these tests more accurately now?
Because that's what you wrote in the RSpec.
That's what was in the RSpec. So when you're thinking through the labs now, and it's like, what does this expect, and then what does this got? Well, I expect false because that's what the test is expecting. That's what I wrote in the test. But then when I actually look at the program, if I pass in 111 as a string and I run .reverse on it, what comes back? Well, the string 111. So naturally, this will come back as true. So this is the first real sort of definition for testing. And that is this idea behind, all right, we talked about edge cases. All right, this idea behind a red-green refactor. So when you're writing tests, right, you have to explain what should the behavior be. You're describing what this method does. And naturally, when you first write it, you're like, okay, this is what I want it to do. Very likely, when you're trying to add new features to methods or like testing for edge cases, it will probably fail. And so you get this sort of bad feeling, right? This like red. And it's dicey, right? Like professor red pens your paper. But then you fix it. So you start with red, you fix it, you get those green lights. And then you look back at your code like, is this code sexy? Should I refactor? So how can I actually make it so that I can refactor this to work? Let me close out all these. Boop, boop. How can I make this so that it works?
You could do and word to float or word to integer doesn't equal 0 because every word becomes 0 if you put it to integer if it's letters.
Word to integer becomes.
But that would work if we combine letters and numbers.
You could do,
I think it still would. We were like messing around with it yesterday. But
what if you just check the class and make sure it's.
What if we check the class on it? What will I get if I check the class on that? Okay. So how is that?
Convert words.
This becomes a little tricky.
Do it contains question mark with 0 through 1 through 0 or 1 through 5, 7, 9, 10.
We could do that, right? If it includes like the numbers 0 through 9.
I think it was call ahead and say the 2 integer thing. Do that.
To integer. Let's check the REPL. If I go into my IRB and I pass in the string 111 and I do to integer, what happens? To string, what happens?
We'll say the same.
It's already a string.
You're 2 integer, 2, yeah.
To integer?
But now if you do anything that is letters, yeah, it won't break.
Yeah?
It'll make it
Well, what happens when I drop that yeet to integer?
0.
Ooh, that's interesting. So there's two ways you can handle it, right? And this becomes your style. And so how many people have like heard the term or looked at code and just like, ooh, that's sexy, or that looks really nice, right? And you ever heard that like coding is sort of like an art? Each person is going to code differently, right? You can get to the same conclusion and you can get it to work, but how you want to approach it individually is going to be your style. You'll start to see as you work in industry that usually when there's like a lot of dummy source code, a lot of dumb seed data, and then you're working on my team and it's all like Mr. Snuffleupagus or like Yeet That Haw or Powerful, you're going to be like, oh, Evans wrote that. You can tell the style. And so you get to start to realize, and you get to start to form your own style. How do you want to approach problems, right? And that's the value that you're going to bring to the team. And so are you going to be like a super professional, or are you going to be really silly, right? Obviously, you're going to fall in somewhere in between, unless you're an extreme case like me, which I'm always extremely professional, obviously. No laughing. Oh, yeah. I think it'd be really stupid to work with me, but fun. So let's try this way. And that is, if I drop anything to I and it winds up being 0, then I know that it's like a word string rather than like a number string. So let's do that.
What if you had 0? What if your string was 0?
That sounds like another edge case. So let's do this. If, all right, the word dot to integer winds up being Is it the number 0 or the string 0?
The number 0.
Okay, okay. Then what do I want to return? Right, so I just return false, and then I drop that super fast end. Cool? What happens with the return keyword?
It stops us the method.
Stops the rest of the method, right? So if it winds up happening and hitting this condition, it hits this return false and will never run line 9. Let's test. Boop. Okay, that's not gonna work. Let's get out of here. Let's yeet that haw. That's also wrong. Let's run rspec. Ooh, did not like that. It kind of breaks on poop and it breaks on 111. So the code that we added broke something before. And it's nice that we have these tests that we can kind of see if I add something, it changes the behavior of earlier things that were working. Has this happened to you on like Learn, when you run Learn? And this is very useful to sort of like write in your tests for your apps in the future. So how can we actually fix this?
I think we did it backwards.
So what should happen? Okay. If it does not equal 0, what should we do? Okay. Otherwise, return false. Let's try. Why is this failing now?
Because we're returning false no matter what.
Okay. So how can we fix that?
Make it false.
Else false? What's going on?
You should only, you go back to
Mhm.
the
And word equals word words, not like putting that in the method after.
Okay. Any other ideas? That's a good one. If,
yeah, that's what
so back to this.
then do. Otherwise, ah,
Y'all don't want to clap? Y'all are all quiet and stuff. Hey, yeah, it's tricky, right? Now you're thinking about all these edge cases. So speaking of edge cases, right, there's a way to sort of think through what's going on. You saw the red, we're trying to write a bunch of code, and then we got the green. Do we need to refactor this right now? Probs not, right? This code looks pretty readable, right? If the word, when you change it to an integer, if it winds up being 0, then we should in fact identify that it's a string word and not like a number string. Otherwise, return false, right? This is okay to read right now. It's not a big deal. So let's go back and continue, right? When it comes back to the edge cases, there's a lot of other things that you might not often think about. So the first thing I would ask you to think about is what is known as this space complexity, right? In terms of the input, let's think about the space complexity. What I mean by that is, what happens if I pass in A? What would happen to my code? True or false? Okay, do we want technically A is a word, right? So is I, but not B, right? B's not a word, well, B, just the letter B. Oh man, that's so dicey. C, also a word, but not the letter D. Yeah, what about D? Right, just like a single letter. When I think about space complexity, I'm thinking about, stay with me till Friday. Stay with me till Friday. I got that right now. Stay with me till Friday. E. Cool? We are thinking about space complexity. So a single letter, right? That's like the space, right? In your app, again, you're the designer. So if you watch Rent the Run, Project Runway, you have Tim Gunn, like, okay, designers, A, palindrome, yeet, or nay? Nay, all right? Okay, so that should be false. Let's run the code. Bloop. Ah, red again. So what can we do?
Just add like if word dot length is 1 or 0 or 1 or something like that.
Okay.
Then you're gonna just add it into that if statement as well.
Where?
If you check if it's an integer.
Should I just do this bad Johnson right here? If word.length is greater than 1, then also do word, whoop, reverse.
You can just put or after the or the integer.
Okay, this bad Johnson, a little pipe action, a little or. Okay. Okay. Bloop, 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 bloop. No? Oh, and. Okay. Okay. Let's test. Bless up. So red, green, and we even snuck in a little bit of a refactor. Instead of 2 separate if statements, we kind of put it in one line, right? If this is a fairly complicated method, then you might not have been able to identify that right away. You might like, you know what, let me just make it work. Let me slap this if statement in there, make it work, and then identify where I can refactor. We happen to refactor at the same time. And so that's kind of like this process, red, green, refactor. And so let's do more of this like space complexity, right? So we have the single letter, but what about that, or this, or that, or this, or that? Is a completely empty string, no word, a palindrome? Okay, designers, what are we doing? Yay? Yeet? Nay. Right, double nay. That is weird. That's weird. So again, we're thinking through some of the space complexity, right? So let's find out what happens. Bloop. Oh, fail again. Red, green, refactor. That's how this cycle is working. It's almost like these tests, right, are allowing me and driving the development of my code. Wow. Nobody thought that was funny? I thought that was hilarious. What can we do now? Man, just hang with me till Friday. Yes, we can strip it. What does that mean? In Ruby. Well, if we're not sure. Oh, you like that? Ruby. Yeah, because that could be a name, you know. Let's just do this. Ruby, remove white spaces. Man, y'all are really dicey, man. You did. So, kind of like PHP, which is a great language, has a method called trim. Cool. PHP is great. They're for different things. You can use strip. Okay. Let's find out what that does. So we can test this method. So I'm going to go right into the verb, and I'm going to go space, K, and I'm going to run that method. Ooh, wowzers. That's powerful. So I noticed that there's this built-in functionality that can help me. Let's actually incorporate that. Where do I want to incorporate that? Okay, I'm hearing a lot of things.
It might be easier just make it a variable.
Yeah, walk me through that.
Call it anything.
Call it anything. Yeah, buddy. I'll help you out here, ready? Stripped. No white spaces. No, Friday. Word.strip. Okay. So, boom, boom, boom. No white spaces. Okay. Cool. All right. Just hanging to Friday. Okay, IRB is not what I want. And let's run RSpec again. Wow. What's up? All right. Okay. Okay. So, more space complexity, right? We will get to symbols. I don't know who said it, but yes, those are always dicey, right? So, edge cases, we're thinking about space complexity. That's not right. Complexity. Cool. And so we have something like one letter, right? A bunch of empty spaces. And then you have also this idea of like, what if it's a lot? At some point, where do we do the cutoff, right? Somebody in your app is gonna be obnoxious and they're gonna come in and they're gonna put in something like this. And then your boss is gonna be like, look, listen, the input, it can't be more than 50 characters, all right? That would be crazy. I don't know if there's a palindrome. My left hand's getting tired. It's 2,000 words? Yeah, that's a lot, right? I'm gonna switch fingers because they're tired.
Yeah, it's really big. That's like biggest.
I think there's a really big one, right? But there's this point where you have to really think about user input, right? Let's say it wasn't the palindrome method, but we're trying to validate the user. How many of you have like been on a website and it's like, cool, let me go sign up for this app, right? My name is Evans Wang, and what's your password? And it said, I'm like, you know what? I'm an arrogant individual. My password's Evans. And it comes back and it says, your password's not strong enough. And I'm like, man, that hurts right there. But the problem is, how did it know? Thank you. How did it know that that was not okay? It was like complexity, right? How did it know that was not okay? It probably did something like, oh, like you have to have at least 8 characters. Sometimes it says things like you need 8 characters, a capital letter, at least 2 lowercase letters, a symbol, a number, and part of your social security number. You're like, oh my God, what the? And so this is like real world, right? In terms of like the validations. How can I validate that this is okay? So we're not gonna actually do this one, but that is something to think about in terms of the space complexity, right? Does it have to be a certain amount? Does it have to be a range? And where do you really want to cut it off? Should somebody put in 8,000 characters for a palindrome? No. And so, again, you can do things like this. And so let's just out of curiosity, will it pass the test? Oof. Ugh. So how will we fix that super fast, actually?
And no white spaces, dot line.
Right. So something easy like no white spaces. Dot length has to also be less than like 20 or something, right? Else return false. So where can we put this block of code?
At the end, you have some conditions there.
More?
And.
More and? Okay. Okay. Good to go. Let's think through more of this like edge cases, right? So we talked about space complexity, right? We have a lot of empty spaces, one space, a ton of space, but what about no space? What happens here? It's gonna fail because we haven't done that. We did the if it's less than 1. All right, so just all these things to kind of think about. These are the edge cases. But let's not get into that, but let's talk more about popular ones, right? Like this. So race car, good to go, all right? We know that that's a palindrome, but would this pass our test? Let's find out. What about a little bit of that? Okay? Okay? What's happening?
If you did 3 3 equals, then it wouldn't do that, right?
Ruby have 3 equals? Oh, I'm sorry. This is just the double comparison. I think it's like exact.
No, in the
Oh, in this?
yeah, like where you're comparing the
Ruby has a triple equals? Ruby has a triple equals? I thought that was only JavaScript. That's weird. Huh?
Does the strip function include some sort of like down case in it, so it takes all the characters and down cases all for you?
A strip is powerful. What's up? Okay. Yeah, like you'll learn about all these additional things that these built-in methods will do. So let's move on. All right. What about symbols? So if I were to do something like, I don't know, poop. Do we want 0, 0? Is that okay? What if I'm mixing and matching? Dicey, right? Dicey, more edge cases, right? You can get fancy. Sometimes when I text people, I'm like, yo, you want to go to lunch? I do this. You're gonna throw that fat umlaut? Ooh. All right, that's obviously not a palindrome, but we can make one, right? We can have, I don't know, what's a palindrome? Yay is a palindrome, I guess. What about A? Ooh, let's drop the umlaut in there. Ooh. Should that be considered a palindrome in your application? If you want to know how to do that, if you just hold the number down long enough, that little pop-up comes up. So if you hear me say dumb things to my coworkers, I'm like, yo, what are you doing for lunch? That's because I type out lunch with the umlaut. I also say klooch and foon, and then I realize that as a lecturer, that's probably a bad idea. So, is this okay? Designers, yay or nay? Okay, kind of a split room, right? And so remember, you design it. So I haven't been doing this because I've been trying to get through the lecture, but you want to rename all of these tests, right? It should return true if blah, 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 blah. It should return false if it's over X amount of characters, and it should return false if it's blah, blah, blah. And so that's up to you all to sort of decide, right? And you have to write those tests so that it makes sense. So for example, let's actually kind of get to one weird example, all right? How are we feeling just about the symbol one here so far? Okay? All right, you decide if you want it to be true or false. You affect what the return result is. You rename this, and then you add to the method. Cool? But what about this one? Let's do this. What if it was actually a number? 1, 2, 3, 2, 1. Made that up on the fly. Can you believe that? I had to think through that one. So much brain power. Palindrome, yay or nay? Who says yes? Who says no? Okay, very good. So let's actually run this code. Let me get rid of this one. Great. And we're failing this test right here. Undefined method strip for a fixed num. I think I'm on like an old version of Ruby. Yeah, I'm on a super old version of Ruby. I think they got rid of fixed num. It's like integer starting 251. But either way, there should be no method like strip or reverse for a integer. So that being said, let's take a look at the test. Whoops. Let's take a look at the test one more time. And it says undefined method strip for fixed num. What do we do when we see the error undefined method?
Well, it means that we're trying to call the method on an object that can't be.
Yeah, right? We basically do something like, oh, can't do strip on a fixed num. That method doesn't exist. What we have been classically conditioned to do as developers is like, oh, that method doesn't exist. Let me go ahead and make that method. So what we can do, and this is real dicey, Have you guys heard of monkey patching? What is monkey patching? Besides the fact that it's not a good idea. Right, you're adding methods, right? And you're overriding things that are already built in. So theoretically, right, if I'm a developer, it's like there's undefined method strip for fix num. Say less, fam. Watch the master at work. God bless you. They'll end the fix num. All right. Oh yeah. All right. I can define strip, and all I needed to do is say true. Is that what I want it to be though, or I want it to be false? I don't know. We'll find out. Huh. 2i for the true class. Okay? So I'm running into more and more problems. I'm running into this rabbit hole that I shouldn't be running into, but I got past that error. Does that make sense so far? Is this what you want somebody to do when they run into this? So instead of telling them like, hey, there's undefined method, we want to tell them that maybe what they're passing in, the argument, the number, is bad. That they shouldn't be able to pass in a number. Otherwise, this is potentially what can happen, and then you run down the rabbit hole, and you're like, great, now I have to fix this problem. Then I'm going to fix this one, then I'm going to fix the next one. But this isn't actually the feature set that you want to do. And so you have to be very explicit about what you tell your users. So, that being said, I don't necessarily want 1, 2, 3 to equal false. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pass in something a little bit different. Ooh. A little dicey, and I want that to raise an error. But what type of error should this be? Right, like there's something wrong with the argument that you're passing in. So I want this to be an argument error. So let's see what happens now. Our argument. Very good. Let's get rid of this hacky nonsense, and let's run RSpec. Okay? Expected argument error, but we got the undefined method error. Why is this happening? You don't have to explain, just a quick thumbs up or thumbs down that you understand why it's expecting argument error, but it's getting undefined method error. Okay, so how can we fix this? We need to go into our code. We actually need to raise the error. So what's the code? What are we looking to do? We're trying to check to see if word is what? All right, so if word, what about the word though? The class is equal to a string. Then we can run all of this. Okay, that's not going to work. That's the idea, right? If it's a string, then do all of it. Otherwise, what should we do? We can raise the argument error. So let's find out. Ooh, nice. And that's really what's going on here. So we have that red, green, and now I can kind of potentially see some room for refactoring here. Where I'm like, all right, I have a bunch of like if, then there's like a if else. There's probably a better way. So I'm actually going to just copy and paste the code that I've written for this. And so you can kind of see what production code will look like, right? The idea is that you're trying to build this feature. You're like, no problem, boss. I could take care of that in 2 seconds. And it turns out it takes you over an hour to actually build. And that's really what happens. And so because you want to take care of all the possible scenarios. And so when you're at work and you're at your first job and your boss is like, cool, I need you to build this feature. You're like, no problem. Give me 1 day. And your boss is like, okay, I'm going to give you 3. And you're like, no big deal, no sweat. You're going to push it, and QA, quality assurance, is going to test your code. And it's going to be like, these are the 19 things that can go wrong. And you're like, all right, hey boss, so I'm gonna need those 3 days, right? And this is what the testing is about, because you could see how it saves you so much time. You don't have to do that manual testing anymore. So what I'm gonna do, in the interest of time, because I think the point has been driven home about why it's beneficial and ultimately how this is gonna impact you on the job. So I'm gonna go into my README, bloop, and all we're gonna do is talk about what all the potential errors can be, right? So we have, if the string is less than 1, right? We want to be able to remove white spaces. So we talked about a man, a plan, a canal. Panama is in fact a palindrome, but because of the spaces that are in there, it'll actually break. So we have to learn how to remove those spaces. These are a bit more edgy, kind of emo. And so what about like random capitalizations, right? That could be interesting. What about punctuation? A man, a plant, a canal. Ooh, just dropped in a quick comma there. Maybe a couple extra spaces. Panama, and then a bunch of unnecessary spaces. That's technically still a palindrome. So we want to be able to remove all that. The dot strip method is good to go. What about weird symbols in the middle of nowhere? Should we be able to take those out and think that race car is still a palindrome? And so there's a lot. So let's see what this looks like, what I have written. Bloop, bloop, bloop. So this is all of your code, which is cool. And this is what I would have written. What I want to do is I want to raise an argument error if the word is not a string. That's like the first line, right? The difference between what I would describe as a junior, a mid-level, and a senior developer, it's not necessarily about how fancy your code is. That's not what it is about at all. It's all about how readable is your code. So if you're looking through this, you don't have to really look at anything else. You can read it top to bottom, one line through, and understand what's happening. Because if you understand what's happening quickly, you can add to it. So in terms of this versus this, readability-wise, one is just slightly easier to read, and that's really the main difference. So continuing on, if it's not a string, it's definitely some sort of argument error. You're passing in a hash, you're passing an array, you're passing in a number. That's not what I'm looking for. Then I'm going to remove all the cases, right? So I'm going to downcase this thing, and I'm going to use something called gsub. Gsub is just sort of like this kind of find and replace. And then we can use something called regular expression. And let me explain what that is. Regular expression, you can identify parts of a string that you like or you don't like, or patterns. Let's take a look at a quick resource. Something called Rubular. And so my test string is powerful, right? And here are some quick cheat sheets. So I can take a look at any single character. So if I just put in the dot, it looks up everything. But what if I wanted, I don't know, any digit? It's just this sort of like /d. So if I put /d, there are no matches, which makes sense. But what about 1, 2, 3? That /d is looking for any digit, and it's pulling those out. And what I want to do is I want to grab all those numbers and I want to replace them with maybe like an empty string or something. And that way it can shrink down that 3, pow, 2, full 1 into just powerful. And so that's how regular expressions like used in a lot of ways. But it can also detect patterns. So this is somewhat difficult to write, but it's very useful. So all I'm doing is I'm doing this sort of like /w. And let's take a look. /w is any non-word character. So if I just change this to /w, there's no matches. But if I drop in a symbol, I drop in a bang, I drop in a @ couple of money signs, I'm pulling out all those symbols that I don't really want. And then I'm just going to replace them with an empty string so it can compact it for me. And that's what's happening. So gsub is awesome. It's what do you want to pull out, and then what do you want to replace it with. So I'm taking out all the symbols and I'm just throwing in an empty string. So that kind of shrinks it. And then I want to return false if it's less than 2, because for whatever reason I've determined single letters are not really palindromes, even if the word is I or A. And then I'm finally going to check to see if it's reversed.
So is this basically setting it up so that if you are like making an app where it's like literally it's this word palindrome and you're entering a word that has something like a question mark or an exclamation point or something like that, are you with this, are you saying like it'll automatically get rid of it for you and you can go ahead and enter that? Or
Yeah, so what I'm saying is I have this method now that we all believe was going to take us 2 seconds to write, right? Word double equal word dot reverse. And all of a sudden it took us like an hour to kind of write the test, think through a lot of the edge cases, and actually test that code very, very quickly. Now what I can do is I can prompt the user, check out my cool app, right? Do you want to log in? And all I'm going to do is gets.chomp is user input. And then I'm going to do user input, and I'm going to run is palindrome with user input. Or I'm going to put is valid with user input. Is whatever, any of my methods, I'm going to test it. If they're all good, then I'm going to continue my app. Otherwise, I'm going to put out like, yo dog, I asked you for a name and you gave me a bunch of symbols. What's going on? Hackers. And so this is kind of how you can use and build these methods to kind of test and validate. But then you have to test and validate your own methods, and that's going to save you a lot of time. Cool? All right, are there any questions on building this, the validations, writing your own RSpec? Can you write your own RSpec? All right, what are some of the things you want to consider when writing RSpec tests? What? I'm sure you're saying the right thing. I just need you guys to help me out here.
Oh, sorry, space complexity.
Right, space complexity, right? Like all the extra blank spaces. If it's 1, 0 characters, a million characters, right? Maybe some weird capitalizations, some symbols. So there's this space complexity. And then like all these weird edge cases, right? Is the data type even correct? Which I should put in there. Boop, boop, boop. Boop. All right. And then like things like, is the data type correct? So these are all the things that you really want to kind of consider. And this is like a very basic version of TDD. There's a lot more to consider, but I think that this is definitely good enough for where you guys are right now. Cool. All right, are there any other?
Is this an industry standard? Like if you're trying to get a project done over a week, like let me just write this out quickly and get this done. You know, just like a little deliverable for yourself, just like I want to knock these out, or is this something that's more in an education environment?
I will say this, if you are in a rush to build features, especially in like a startup, very likely tests will come later and last. It becomes a low priority because salespeople, let me just kill this recording.